Without the commitment, hard work, and responsibility of both Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, women wouldn't have the rights that they have today. Susan B. Anthony was born on February 15th in Adams, Massachusetts, to Quaker parents. She was the second of 6 children. Her open-minded mother was not originally a Quaker, but after she married Susan's father, her colorful clothes had to disappear, but her open-mindedness did not. In her Quaker religion, women were allowed to speak at meetings and voice their thoughts and opinions. Her father valued education so much that when Susan came home complaining about not being able to learn long division like the boys, he pulled Susan and her sister Guelma out of school to teach at home. Susan never married because she didn't want to be under a man. She once said, "I declare to you that woman must not depend upon the protection of man, but must be taught to protect herself, and there I take my stand." Elizabeth Cady Stanton was born in Johnstown, New York on November 12, 1815. She had many sisters and several brothers, and her father made no effort in hiding his favoritism toward his sons. Unfortunately, and much to the dismay of Elizabeth's father, the brothers all died young. When her father was mourning her last brother's death, Elizabeth climbed up onto his lap, trying to think of how to comfort him. After a few moments, he said, "I wish you were a boy." From that day on, she tried her hardest to fulfill his wish by acting like one. But although she tried to please her father, he would always say, "I wish you were a boy." This started a spark that eventually became a raging fire in her strong belief for equal rights. In 1840, Elizabeth married an abolitionist named Henry B. Stanton. They had 7 children, 6 boys and 1 girl. Elizabeth was different from many of the suffragettes who had few, if any, children at all. At that time, the rights for women were very slim. They were encouraged not to get a proper education or to strive for a skilled career. When a woman was married, her name immediately changed to her spouse's and her property became his. Some men became intoxicated regularly and would sometimes beat their wife and children. But because women did not have the rights to apply for a divorce, they were bound to their husband despite their hard circumstances. In July of 1848, in the town of Seneca Falls, New York, Elizabeth and a few other women organized the first Women's Rights Convention. In this meeting, Elizabeth Cady Stanton gave her famous speech that co-authored the Declaration of Independence and introduced the demand for voting rights. Elizabeth said later that if she had known how much uproar the Women's Rights Convention would cause, she might not have said what she did. Susan B. Anthony's parents attended one of these meetings. Later, they told their daughter, who then, in 1851, traveled to Seneca Falls to attend what would be her first of many women's rights meetings. After the meeting, Amelia Bloomer introduced Susan B. Anthony to Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Later, Elizabeth wrote,
"There she stood, with her good, earnest face and genial smile, dressed in gray delaine, hat and all the same color, relieved with pale blue ribbons, the perfection of neatness and sobriety. I liked her thoroughly from the beginning."
This was the beginning of a friendship that would last for over 50 years. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton each had different personalities, but their characters combined to create a strong leadership. Elizabeth said,
"While she is slow and analytic in composition, I am rapid and synthetic. I am the better writer, she the better critic. She supplied the facts and statistics, I the philosophy and rhetoric, and together we have made arguments that have stood unshaken by the storms of 30 long years, arguments that no man has answered."
Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton may have been solid partners, but they also had a very strong friendship. Elizabeth was never very close to her parents or her family, especially after she married Henry. Susan was like a sister to Elizabeth, and her children called her Aunt Susan. In 1854, Susan B. Anthony was refused permission to speak at the Capitol and Smithsonian. She then started her campaign around the state of New York. She chose the winter because the farmers were at home. In this campaign, Susan was an amazing speaker and convinced many people to join her cause. Her speaking skills helped her when she had to go to court. She would speak to the people of the town about her cause before the trial and, like her campaign, many people believed in the movement and they would have to postpone the trial to another town. Susan went into town with 3 of her sisters one morning on voting day and told the man in the office to register her to vote. The man protested, but Susan told him that she could sue him if he did not let her vote. He then registered her and she went on to be one of the first women to vote. On November 18, 1872, Susan B. Anthony was arrested for voting. The deputy marshal came to her front door and arrested her right in her own home. He told her to turn herself in, but she demanded to be arrested properly, handcuffs and all. The officer took her on the streetcar, and when the man came to collect their car fare, she said,
"I am in his possession. He will pay my fare,"
while pointing to the deputy marshal. During her court case, she was tried by Judge Hunt and was unfairly fined $100, which she said that she would not pay a penny of. The judge made the mistake of saying, "Do you have anything to add?"
"Yes, Your Honor,"
said Anthony.
"I have many things to say, for in your ordered verdict of guilty, you have trampled underfoot every vital principle of our government. My natural rights, my civil rights, my political rights, my judicial rights are all alike ignored, robbed of the fundamental privilege of citizenship, and degraded from the status of a citizen to that of a subject, and not only myself individually, but all of my sex, are, by your Honor's verdict, doomed to political subjection under this so-called form of government."
After arguing back and forth, Judge Hunt said, "The court must insist. The prisoner has been tried according to the established forms of law."
"Yes, Your Honor, but by forms of law, all made by men, interpreted by men, administered by men, in favor of men, and against women. And hence, Your Honor's verdict of guilty against a United States citizen for the exercise of that citizen's right to vote, simply because that citizen was a woman and not a man."
In 1881, after long months of toil, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Matilda Joslyn Gage, a fellow suffragette, published Volume 1 of the History of Women's Suffrage. In later years, the rest of the volumes were written. The purpose of writing these books was to have a history of the women's suffrage movement after all those who could retell the history were gone. Many other books were written, one of them being 80 Years and More, written by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. In it, it says,
"The happiest people I have known have been those who gave themselves no concern about their own souls, but did their uttermost to mitigate the miseries of others."
Not only did they write books, but Susan, in 1898, also established a press bureau in the newspaper to feed articles on women's suffrage to the national and local press. 7 years later, she met with President Theodore Roosevelt in Washington, D.C. and discussed about submitting a suffrage amendment to Congress. But not until August 18, 1920, 14 years after Susan B. Anthony died, Amendment 19 was issued by Congress. It states, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation." Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton never lived to see their dream they worked so hard for come true, but they understood the importance of paving the way so that future women would have the rights that they deserve. After Amendment 19 was issued, women then had the responsibility to participate in local and national elections, not to neglect their rights, and to be moral and honest citizens. Without both Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, women wouldn't have the rights that they have today, and the United States would not be as successful. They were truly heroes in American history.